I think of myself as a bit of a grinder because I can work for a long time on a problem and keep approaching it from different angles until I feel like I've solved it. I do like balancing the intellectual activities with physical activities. So I do a lot of chores around the house. I split logs for the winter. I like to go on walks with the dogs, play hockey a couple times a week. It's part of my nature to be active. Doing chores like that and sitting there for a couple hours and splitting wood and stacking it kind of lets me turn off my mind for a while. There's kind of a Zen-like quality to those kinds of activities that I like. One of the things that I like to think that I'm good at is problem solving. It's one of those things that's hard to teach, I think. First off, defining what the problem is, identifying what the core issues are, is critical. And then thinking creatively about different ways to solve it. It's an iterative process. You have to keep being creative and keep your eye on your goals in order to help solve the problems. Creativity has always been an important part of my life. I find that there's lots of ways to be creative, so I get the same enjoyment in my professional life, solving technical problems and working with teams to come up with the best solutions and try to tackle problems that have never been solved before. At Sony, I had the pleasure of leading a group of AI researchers to try to solve some really challenging technical problems applying AI to video games. Video games are really interesting places in which to try to apply AI because they're very complex environments designed to challenge human players, but they're also simulations, and so you can run them over and over, and agents can learn from experience by just playing the game over and over. I think it's a place where creativity meets science. So my team, for instance, brings the expertise in AI algorithms and building the infrastructure to train agents that can solve hard problems. Video games are all about creativity and creating emotional reactions in players. The ideal AI for video games is not necessarily an optimal AI. It's one that helps players get the most enjoyment out of the experiences that they're having with games. And that's a very interesting and kind of unexplored area in which to be working. And so we built our most high-profile project was a project called GT Sophie, which we built for the game Gran Turismo, made by Polyphony Digital in Japan. And we trained an agent that could race in the game against the best drivers in the world. But they were also capable of applying tactics when they needed to. They could use a slipstream, they could make passes when they needed to, and they also respected the rules of good sportsmanship, so they wouldn't run into other cars. And so it was a very tense experience to race these agents against the best drivers in the world. We were able to beat them in this event, and then we got to work with Polyphony over the next couple of years to put this agent into the game. One of the really interesting things about that is you don't want to deploy a superhuman agent into the video game because that's fun only for the top 10 drivers in the world. You want something that's accessible to the huge community of players out there with a wide variety of skills. And we also had to figure out how to have this agent generalize to be able to drive any car in the game on almost any track in the game. So there were a lot of really interesting challenges to make that work, and we've been really happy with the success of that project in the game. And I've really emphasized with my team at Sony that we should play these games to understand what the player experience is and what the challenging problems are for the AIs we're building. Gran Turismo is a great example because as we got into trying to build AIs for that game, I went and bought a little racing seed and spent time trying to learn how to play the game and become a better driver so I could get a feel for what an AI in that game should be. I've probably spent more than 200 hours racing in Gran Turismo. So players have responded really positively to the evolution of GT Sophie over the last few years. That we've released many variations of the agent, and most recently it was released by Polyphony Digital in extra content that players could purchase, which had 50 races that were specially configured, that had special cars and everything. And all the opponents in those races were GT Sophie, and that's been a very popular extension to the game. I think wrestling was a feature of my background that helped me get into MIT. I was, of course, a good student, took a lot of advanced courses, and did well on the SATs and everything. But coming from a small town in Wisconsin, where there weren't a lot of people applying to MIT, and then also being able to wrestle in college helped contribute to my admission. Then once I came to MIT, I got recruited by some of the other wrestlers on the wrestling team who were in this fraternity, SAE, which was kind of a sports fraternity on MIT's campus. And Mick Mounts, who was the founder of Kiva Systems and came up with the original ideas, he was also recruited. We were in the same class. He was on the baseball team, I was on the wrestling team. We ended up being roommates for most of our time at MIT. We were both mechanical engineering majors, so we took a lot of the same classes, and we were really good friends by the end of our time there. And Mick went after his MBA, he worked in Silicon Valley, including a couple years at Webvan, which was a grocery home delivery startup during the dot-com bubble. And that's where he got exposed to the concept, the warehouse problem, and the fact that technologies at the time could not handle e-commerce, and got him thinking about that problem. And when he first started thinking about using robots to solve the problem, he started talking to his friends, including me, and we started brainstorming how you could build a system that could solve this. When people think of robotics in warehouse, especially these days, they're probably thinking of humanoid-shaped robots. With Kiva, we took a much simpler approach and a much more practical approach. It was still incredibly innovative, but it broke the problem down differently. The robots themselves are they're like the size of an ottoman on wheels. They're basically just taxis. The inventory is stored on shelving units that are kind of 3 foot by 3 foot square devices with space underneath them, and the robot can drive underneath and lift the whole shelving unit up and carry that whole thing to a station. And then at the edges, people are still there picking the products that need to go into the orders. But we've eliminated the 10 miles of walking that they used to have to do in warehouses, so they can focus on being the productive part of the task all day. When he first presented the idea to me, it wasn't quite what we see today in an Amazon warehouse. Originally, he thought each robot would carry one item, and when you needed something, you'd call for it, and the other robots would get out of the way and it would make its way to the front. And my first reaction was, that's never going to work. But the next time we talked, he had iterated on the idea, and it had become like more of a grid layout, kind of like a city layout, roads, and the robots traveled down the roads, and they were in an organized fashion. And when I looked at that, I'm like, this could work. If we could build robots that are reliable, I can see how we can solve all these problems of coordinating them and figuring out which robots should do which piece of work to fill each order. And we immediately got working on a simulation of that environment so we can test these ideas at scale. And we recruited RAF to help build the robots. And we had some other MIT alumni friends who helped build the first prototypes. We just drew on our network to try to build the first version of this in some form to start showing investors and potential customers. What was really nice about the founding team was that we were all technically oriented engineers, but we all had different areas of expertise. So Mick, with his mechanical engineering background, but also his MBA, he was really good at understanding the customer problem and picturing how technology could help solve it, and convincing people to take a gamble on this technology. Raf was really good at control systems and understanding how to make the robots that would reliably do this task, particularly like moving from one grid cell to the next, which is actually a really hard problem, even though it looks easy on the surface. And then my responsibility was on the software side, designing the architecture for the software and the AI algorithms that were going to make decisions about what robots would pick up which pieces of work, where they would go in the warehouse, to which stations, and how they would plan paths to get there and not interfere with each other. By changing the whole metaphor of how the warehouse worked, from people going to the products out in the warehouse for the products coming to the people, there were a lot of different advantages to that system. One of the big advantages was that because you now had random access to any piece of inventory in the warehouse at any time, instead of it taking multiple hours to fill an order because the box had to travel on 10 miles of conveyor, or a person had to push the box around the warehouse and collect the items, instead, all the stuff just came to you in parallel, and you could fill an order in 5 minutes. That's a huge change. I do think the Kiva system has really changed the landscape of logistics, e-commerce in particular. What was novel with e-commerce compared to traditional logistics was, instead of shipping cases of things to stores, now the industry had to actually open up the cases and pick out ones and twos and send to people. That posed a really big challenge for the industry. And Kiva is what allowed us to start solving that problem, and it's what interested Amazon in such that they eventually acquired the company. The reason that you can order from Amazon and get things the same day is a lot because they're running Kiva systems in most of the warehouses. I played hockey for several years, maybe 6 or 8 years as a kid, until we reached the age of middle school. And I was decent for the area, but not like a superstar. But I was small, and I wasn't growing very fast. And I decided I should find a sport in which I competed against people my own size. It shifted me to wrestling, which was a great shift for me. I really enjoyed that sport, and I think it helped me get into MIT for college, and I really enjoyed wrestling there. I now play hockey again, even though I'm still the smallest person on the ice. Playing hockey now is a big part of my life because it provides that physical outlet that I like. But it's also, I really enjoy the team aspect of it, getting up with the guys and going to the rink and showing up for each other. I really get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I'm on the board of technical advisors for the Discovery Museum here in Acton. Museums like this that are focused on technology and science aimed at the younger generation really inspires kids to explore these concepts and get involved in science and engineering, try to understand how the world works. I think the hands-on approach to learning is really important. I mean, when you're a kid, you learn so much by play, right? We learn a certain amount in school and through road exercises and things, but things really come home and you really start to understand them when you interact with the world. You know, when I was a child, I liked playing games, and we used to get Games magazine, and I liked solving the puzzles in there. So I always get a little endorphin rush from being presented with a challenging mental problem and trying to focus on it and solve it. When I was 13, after my bar mitzvah, I bought myself an Apple II computer. Those were relatively new at the time. It might be surprising, but there were no software programs you could buy for them. Instead, we had to write our own software. It was just a hobbyist activity. I basically started by inventing video games, trying to make them for myself and typing them, program them into the computer. I wouldn't say any of them turned out great or even finished, but I really enjoyed working on them and learned a lot in the process. Certainly, there's a lot of reward that you feel when you create something, especially when it gets used. I feel really lucky to have been able to participate in projects like Kiva systems and later with Sony on AI for video games that led to things like GT Sophie. These were just really interesting challenges to do something that had never been done before, that required both creativity and technical prowess to make really work. I often look at my career as a set of directions that I took because they seemed like the best one at the time. But what I found often is things I did before that might seem unrelated become really important to my success doing the next thing. Sometimes I like telling my story in reverse because people look at you and see some impressive accomplishments, and it's easy to forget that all of us started as little kids, exploring things we were interested in and having fun and learning about the world. And it's an interesting story to kind of go backwards and see how the chain of events led from, in reverse from where I am now all the way back to just a random little kid in Wausau, Wisconsin. It shows that kind of everyone has the potential to have stories unfold like this. And if we nurture people and give them the opportunities at the younger ages, these chances will open up across their careers.